Rain. A small kindness in the downpour. The next morning, everything turned upside down. Before we continue, subscribe. Your support helps us tell stories that matter. It was late, and the diner smelled of coffee and wet wool. The neon sign flickered a tired blue, and Maria wiped her hands on her apron while listening to the rain pound like a slow drum against the awning. The bell over the door squealed, and an old man, soaked through his bones, leaned on the frame holding a shabby coat that smelled faintly of aguardiente and old tobacco. He blinked, water dripping from his beard, and asked for shelter with a voice like creaking wood. Maria could have told him they were closing. She could have counted the few bills in the register and turned him away. Instead, she pushed a chair, set a bowl of soup down with both hands, and covered him with a threadbare blanket. It was a small act, a human gesture, but it carried weight. That night, a note was folded and slid onto the napkin holder. A quiet thanks, a name signed Henry Caldwell. Nothing about that moment suggested how loud it would become. What happened the next morning, and why one favor would return with consequences no one expected, is what you will see now. Stay with us and learn how a single act of kindness can change a whole town. The rain had painted the street in strips of mirror. Inside, the diner hummed with the hiss of the grill and the metallic clink of plates. Maria tasted the steam of the soup on her tongue, felt the warmth soak into her gloves, and smelled the sharp citrus of the lemon slices someone had left by the pie case. Carla, the short-order cook, called out from behind the counter, with grease on her fingers and a laugh in her throat. "You leavin' him out there?" Maria asked. The old man lifted his head, his voice low. "No, miss, I am fine here." Maria offered a ragged smile and said, "Sit, warm up. You can stay till it stops." Carla chimed in, "You got soup, coffee, and a dry chair. Name's Henry, isn't it?" Henry nodded, the rain still falling from his hat in slow drops. The bell chimed again, and Sam, the late-shift delivery driver, came in smelling of oil and rain, rubbing his palms together. "Maria, you okay? You closing soon?" Maria shook her head. "Not yet. He needs shelter." Tom, the manager, glanced over with impatience creasing his forehead. "We close at 10, Maria. You know the rules." Maria looked at Henry, felt the tremor in his hands, and said, "He can sit till the storm eases. I will handle his coffee." Tom sighed and said, "This is a business. We have policies." Maria answered, "People are part of business too, Tom." Tom's jaw tightened. Policies exist for a reason. Carla muttered under her breath, "Sometimes rules." Forget the human part. Maria poured coffee, the steam curling into the air with the smell of burnt sugar, and set down the bowl of soup that gave off the savory, slow scent of simmered bones and rosemary. Henry took a sip, his hands warm against the mug, and said softly, "Thank you. The rain takes much these days." Maria sat across, feeling the vinyl seat stick to her skirt, noticing the fluorescent light buzzing like an insect above. "Why were you out there alone?" she asked. Henry's eyes carried stories, and in a voice threaded with memory he said, "Lost my way. Lost my place for a moment. You gave me a chair." Tom cleared his throat and tapped the cash register like a metronome. "Maria, please, close the register. We need to lock up." Maria met his gaze, and with a small, steady smile, she said, "One more cup, then I will do closing." Sam leaned in. "Boss, she won't take long. Let her be." Tom looked at the customers. Jenna the reporter, who always sat with a notebook, Pastor Luis, who drank black coffee and read his Bible, and a couple of late travelers, and said, "We cannot set a precedent." Maria, without anger, but with calm resolve, replied, "When a person knocks, we open the door." The exchange stretched, each sentence a small pebble dropped in a pool, rippling outward. At some point, a folded note appeared on the napkin holder, clean paper soaked at the corner from rain, and Henley tapped it with a finger that trembled less than his voice. "Keep it," he said to Maria. "One day, maybe you'll need a good word." Morning came with a thinner rain, and the diner smelled now of lemon oil and fried onions, a bittersweet reminder of late hours. Maria arrived 5 minutes early, hair still damp, apron already tied, and the day began with the ordinary clatter of plates. She smiled, served pancakes that smelled of maple and butter, and greeted regulars by name. But at 10 a.m., Tom called her behind the counter and closed the swing door with a faint click that sounded like finality. He spoke quickly, the words hard and precise, and began to read from a little notebook where every rule seemed carved in ink. "Maria, we have complaints about your shift last night. You kept non-paying patrons. You delayed closing. This is grounds for termination." Maria's face fell like a curtain. "But I only kept him for an hour while it poured. He needed shelter." Tom's mouth thinned. Policy is policy. The owner made it clear. Carla, who had been wiping down pie case glass, snapped, "That's not fair. She saved a man." Sam, who had come in with a smear of grease, put his hand on Tom's sleeve. "We see her every day. She is here for everyone." Tom turned, speaking louder, making the room inhale. "This is not about kindness. This is about accountability." Maria protested. "I have bills, Tom. My mother is ill. I cannot lose this job." Tom's tone hardened. "We have to think of the business." Jenna, who had been jotting notes, looked up with a frown and asked, "Are you sure this is the owner's decision?" Tom refused to meet her eyes and said, "I have been instructed to act." A few customers murmured. Pastor Luis crossed himself and whispered, "This feels wrong." A woman named Rosa, who ran the flower stand next door, stepped in, clutching a small bouquet, and said vehemently, "You are firing a woman for helping an old man in the rain?" Tom, feeling the pressure of the room, announced, "Maria, you are fired. You must leave by noon." Maria's knees softened, and she felt the sting of hot tears, the metallic taste of humiliation, the buzz of fluorescent lights suddenly too loud. "But you saw him," she whispered. "He thanked me." Tom repeated, "Company policy. We cannot have exceptions." The customers' whispers multiplied like rainfall on glass, voices thick with disbelief. Maria collected her belongings in silence, the leather of her shoes squeaking against the floor, the apron folding into her hands like a small surrender. As she walked out, a single napkin slipped from her pocket, the note Henry had left. It fluttered to the tile and landed face down. If you felt anger when you heard that scene, you are not alone. Moments like this make us question what we value. Have you ever seen someone punished for the very compassion the community needs? Share your story in the comments below, starting with, "I saw." Tell us what happened and how you reacted. Your words matter because every shared experience gives others courage and gives us ideas for more stories. This is a space where listeners become witnesses and witnesses become advocates. Now that you have a place to voice what moved you, keep reading to see how the witness in this story decided not to let this moment pass without notice. Henry had left the diner in the rain, but not before he had walked the block and stood under a lamppost where the light smelled faintly of gasoline and old paper, thinking. He had been a judge once, Henry Caldwell, retired with a slow, precise patience and a small pension that allowed him small luxuries and a quiet habit of walking in storms. He had watched Maria's exchange through the glass, the way she refused to abandon someone in need. He noticed the way Tom had used policy like a shield. There were 3 things Henry did then. He took the napkin, he memorized the faces in the diner, and he decided he would return. He smelled the damp wool of his coat, tasted the metallic tang of the storm water, and heard the muffled traffic like distant thunder as he made a call. He dialed a number he had kept for years, the owner, Mr. Alvarez, a man who owned several local businesses and who had once been his neighbor. "Mr. Alvarez," Henry said slowly, "I was at your diner last night. There's been a wrong done. I think you should know." Henry's voice carried weight. Mr. Alvarez, who prided himself on hands-on oversight despite the distance of his office, smelled of cigar smoke and old files on the line. He agreed to come see, and asked Henry to bring any proof he might have. Henry said simply, "I left a note on the napkin holder. Please come." The next morning, Mr. Alvarez arrived, his shoes whispering on the wet pavement, a briefcase that smelled of leather and old receipts. The community noticed. Rosa at the flower stand, Pastor Luis on his way to a meeting, Jenna from the local paper who had been taking notes. All of them felt the air prick with expectation. When Mr. Alvarez entered, the room shifted. He was not alone. Henry stood beside him, his coat still damp, the faint scent of aguardiente lingering around him, like a memory. And Officer Ramirez, called by a concerned customer, loomed quietly by the door. Mr. Alvarez's voice was calm but carried a firmness that cut through the clamor. "Tom, what's happened here?" Tom faltered. "I followed orders. There were complaints." Mr. Alvarez raised an eyebrow. "Complaints from whom?" Jenna, who had been watching, raised her hand and said, "I wrote what I saw. The manager acted before the owner was even aware." Mr. Alvarez walked to the counter and picked up the napkin, smoothing it with practiced fingers. He then surprised everyone by saying, "We have cameras. I asked for footage." He gestured, and within minutes, after a few calls to his office, the feed from a small camera above the diner door filled a tablet screen, crisp and undeniable. The footage showed Tom checking his watch, watching Maria, and then deliberately turning the sign to "closed early" after a customer with a complaint that seemed arranged. The clip showed a small handoff between Tom and a supplier that looked too eager to avoid scrutiny. The room smelled suddenly of lemon oil and coffee, but under it a metallic undercurrent of exposure. "This is proof," Henry said. "This is why kindness should not be invisible." Mr. Alvarez looked at Tom and then at Maria, who stood by the door with her jacket clutched like a shield. "Tom," he said, "explain." Tom's explanations came out slow and ragged. He had faced pressure from someone to reduce labor costs and tighten rules. He had taken steps that crossed lines. Names were mentioned. Diego, the supplier. Carla heard murmurs about small stolen items. Rosa said she had noticed missing bouquets. Sam recalled deliveries altered. The list grew like a storm cloud. The investigation that followed was methodical. Mr. Alvarez ordered a full review and called for the local newspaper's coverage. Jenna took notes with a steady hand and promised to document the truth. Officer Ramirez asked a few questions. Direct questions, smelled of rain and rain-slicked leather, and arranged for a formal report. Cameras that had been installed for safety were now proof. They showed the pattern of petty thefts and a deliberate shifting of blame. Diego, the supplier, was questioned and admitted to making side deals. Carla testified about missing cash from the register. Rosa described bouquets that never were paid for. Sam provided timestamps for deliveries. Pastor Luis offered to mediate community tensions. The town listened as a small coalition formed. Henry, Mr. Alvarez, Jenna, Officer Ramirez, Pastor Luis, Rosa, and Sam. They named the problem, traced transactions, and compiled evidence. The process smelled of dust and paper and the sharp smell of ink. Each page another tile in the mosaic of truth. Tom found himself facing consequences he had tried to outsource onto others. The public revelation was both swift and careful. In front of the diner, with neighbors gathered and the rain a steady applause, Mr. Alvarez announced that the evidence showed misconduct and that steps would be taken to make amends. "We cannot undo hurt," he said, "but we can repair." Tom was put on leave pending further action, and the town's coverage, led by Jenna, framed the story not as scandal for scandal's sake, but as an example of community vigilance. The diner reopened the next day with Maria behind the counter, hands steady, eyes tired but resolute. Mr. Alvarez offered reinstatement and an apology, and also proposed a small partnership with a local nonprofit to support workers in need. A donation was made to a newly formed fund for staff facing emergencies, and a promise of reintegration and fairer policies was written on a white sheet visible to all. In the weeks that followed, the diner changed. New cameras were installed with transparent policies, staff meetings included clear channels for reporting concerns, and a small committee led by Pastor Luis and Rosa oversaw a modest workers' fund. Jenna published a piece that detailed the sequence of events with care, and the coverage sparked similar conversations at other businesses. Maria was not only reinstated, she was offered a new role organizing community outreach, a partnership between the diner and a local shelter, and received a modest bonus that allowed her to pay for her mother's medication. The town, which had watched from its porches and coffee shops, began to show up, with casseroles, with offers to repaint the diner, with suggestions for improved scheduling. Henry visited most mornings, now dry, his coat folded neatly, and sometimes sat at the corner booth, telling stories that made the room warm in the way only memory can. He would often joke with Sam about deliveries, and tease Carla about her biscuits, his voice a low echo of something steady. He never sought recognition. His closed mouth and open hands were reward enough. There was still a twist. Someone had orchestrated small thefts and tried to pin them on staff to cover bigger losses. The camera footage led to a police inquiry. Diego faced charges for fraud, and some restitution was ordered. Tom was removed from his managerial role and offered a chance to make amends under supervision, with the clear message that trust must be rebuilt. The community chose not to punish with exile alone, but to insist on accountability and pathways to repair. Maria, in a gesture that surprised those who had watched her suffer, handed an envelope to Henry at the counter one rainy afternoon. Inside was a small check made out to a community cause he supported, and a note that said simply, "Thank you for standing." He looked up, his eyes rimmed with thin light, and said, "You did the same for me." She smiled, the diner's air filling with the smell of cinnamon and fried onions, the mood quiet and rich as bread. The epilogue was not a neat curtain, but a slow unspooling of better days. The diner stayed open later for community meals. A modest partnership with the shelter fed neighbors one night a week, and the local paper continued to run stories about accountability and small acts of courage. Maria's mother received care, and Maria used the bonus to begin a tiny savings that would become a safety net. Henry became a regular volunteer at the shelter he often mentioned in passing, and the town awarded the diner a small grant to improve equipment and safety. Rosa planted a small rose garden outside and named a bench for the night when the rain had turned into something like fate. People who had watched spoke about dignity and about how one human choice could tilt the scales. In the end, Maria organized a small table with a stack of envelopes and handed one to Tom when he returned to apologize, saying, "I will not forget. I will not hold only anger." It was a complicated forgiveness that did not erase hurt but sought to restore honesty. The last image was simple: rain on the diner window, a steaming cup on the counter, and the community gathered to eat. In that light, the town realized that kindness was not weakness, and that sometimes, when the storm comes, opening a door becomes a way to reshape a future.